I need a job with a steady paycheck.
I need a job that offers health care on day one for me and my kids.
I want a job where I can get certified in technical roles, like robotics or software engineering.
In communities across the country, hourly Amazon employees earn an average of over $23 an hour, with opportunities to grow their skills and their paycheck by enrolling in free skills training programs and apprenticeships. Learn more at aboutamazon.com.
What's up, guys? You're listening to The Black Hour, real true crimes, real stories, and this is part 2. New episodes drop every weekend, every Monday and Thursday. And you follow The Black Hour, don't miss any episodes, okay? Room 348. The Bullet No One Saw Part 2. The next morning, just after sunrise, Detective Scott Apple picked up Ken Brennan in his unmarked apartment vehicle. The plan was simple. Visit room 348 together, the very room where Greg Flanagan had collapsed, face first on the carpet, cigarette still burning in hand. Inside the hotel, Apple laid it all out. He showed Brennan the crime scene photos, the autopsy reports, and detailed every single lead, theory, and dead end he'd chased for the past 7 months. Brennan listened, nodding occasionally, his arms folded tight over his chest, eyes darting between the pictures and the room itself. And then, Brennan spoke. What he said changed everything. I think I know how this guy died. I think I know when he died. I think I know who killed him. And I think I know how we're going to catch him. Apple turned to him like, "What the hell are you talking about?" "Come on," he said, half laughing. "You're joking, right?" "Hear me out," Brennan replied. "But first, I need to call the guy's wife. One call, one clue, a breakthrough." Brennan stepped outside into the hallway and pulled out his phone. He dialed Susie Flanagan's number. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey Susie, quick question," he said. "Was your husband left-handed or right-handed?" "He was right-handed," she answered, a little confused. "Okay, and when he smoked, which hand did he use for the cigarette?" "His right hand," she said. "Always?" "You're sure?" "Positive. Always the right." "Got it. Thanks." He hung up. Then Brennan turned back to Apple, standing in the doorway of the hotel room, and began to explain everything. The morning Greg was found, his room was noticeably hot and stuffy, which was strange, because Greg always kept it cold at night. Arctic cold. Everyone knew that about him. So what changed? Brennan pointed to the hotel's maintenance log. That evening, Greg had tripped the circuit breaker in his room while microwaving popcorn. The power had gone out. The maintenance man had come up around 8:30 p.m., reset the breaker, and left Greg alive and well. Now here's what likely happened. When the breaker flipped back on, Greg forgot to turn the AC back on. The room gradually heated up. That means he must have died shortly after the repair, before the heat really set in. Because if he had lived much longer, he would have noticed the warmth and turned the AC on again. This timing detail put his time of death somewhere between 8:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. That clue alone was valuable. But what came next was even more important. Brennan shifted his focus to something that no one else had questioned. The cigarette. When Greg was found on the carpet, a lit cigarette was still wedged between the fingers of his left hand. That didn't sit right with Brennan. Why? Because Susie had just confirmed. Greg only smoked with his right hand. So now there were questions. Why was it in his left? Did someone place it there? Did Greg move it himself? That last possibility was the answer. Here's what Brennan realized. Greg had probably lit that cigarette, sat down on the bed, and settled in like usual. Remote in one hand, candy bar in the other. But then, something happened. Something violent. He had just lit the cigarette, and suddenly he was struck with a crippling injury. The kind that makes you gasp, stagger, and panic. As his body reacted, he likely stood up, instinctively moving toward the hotel room door, possibly to call for help. And to grab the handle with his dominant right hand, he shifted the cigarette to his left. Something any smoker would do without thinking. And that's where death caught up with him. He collapsed mid-step, face first, onto the rug. Cigarette still gripped between those fingers mid-burn. That tiny detail, a cigarette in the wrong hand, told Brennan exactly when Greg died, what he was doing, and that no one moved him afterward. It proved that the fatal injury happened in this room, not the hallway, not somewhere else. No way someone beats this guy half to death, Brennan said. Then gently props a cigarette in his fingers. Come on. No chance. The first big break. At this point, the entire timeline was beginning to click into place. The breaker tripped equals 8:30 p.m. SC never turned back on equals room got warm. Greg didn't notice equals he died shortly after. Cigarette equals proves he was in the room moving when he died. All these details, temperature, timing, cigarette placement, ruled out theories of an external attack, hallway scuffle, or body relocation. Greg had died right here. And now that Brennan had nailed the when and where, it was time to figure out the how and who had done it. And in the next chapter, they uncover a detail in room 349, the room right next door, that turns this quiet mystery into something far more explosive. For seasoned investigator Ken Brennan, every crime scene was a puzzle. And if even one piece didn't fit, no matter how small, the entire picture was incomplete. And that's exactly what made Greg Flanagan's death so maddening. Everything about the case screamed contradiction. The internal injuries were massive, like something you'd see in a car crash. But the outside of his body was practically untouched. There was no blood, no struggle, no noise reported by neighbors, no overturned furniture, and no obvious motive. Greg had clearly died in that room, and he had died fast. But how? Brennan knew better than to jump to conclusions. In his line of work, that was a dangerous habit. Letting what you don't know outrun what you do, that's how cases go cold. So instead, he stayed grounded in the evidence. And one thing stuck out, the electricians next door. That night, when Greg tripped the circuit breaker cooking popcorn, the blackout didn't just affect room 348.
To remind you that 60% of sales on Amazon come from independent sellers, here's John from Devil Dog Pet Company.
We run our family business from Sterling Heights, Michigan, but we can reach customers all over the country thanks to Amazon. Good boy.
Shop small business on Amazon.
It also cut power to room 349, the electrician's room. That connection, as fragile as it seemed, was worth exploring. Back when Detective Scott Apple first looked into the case, he had briefly spoken to the union workers. They were friendly, cooperative, didn't raise any alarms. Yeah, they were nice, Apple had told Brennan. You see anything hinky? Brennan asked. No, nothing, Apple shrugged. But Brennan wasn't convinced. If they were drinking, Brennan said, they had to talk about it to each other. Somebody knows something. One of their close friends or coworkers. Someone's heard something. The steel-toed clue. The next stop was a visit to Dr. Tommy Brown, the medical examiner who had first ruled Greg's death a homicide. Brennan had a very specific question. Doc, could these injuries have come from a severe beating? Dr. Brown nodded. Absolutely. Especially that deep scrotum laceration. That could have come from a steel-toed boot if someone had kicked him hard enough. And guess who wore steel-toed boots? Union electricians. Just like the ones staying next door. Now, a picture was starting to form. Greg's room and the electrician's room had both lost power. That could have caused annoyance, especially if the guys next door were drinking and watching TV. Maybe someone banged on Greg's door. Maybe words were exchanged. Maybe someone lashed out. A single, powerful kick, and then walked away, not realizing the blow would be instantly fatal. The idea seemed far-fetched at first, but it was the only scenario that accounted for the strange injuries and the completely undisturbed room. While Apple kept busy in Beaumont, Brennan returned home to Florida, but his mind never left the case. He started digging through hours of hotel surveillance footage, frame by frame. He called it watching the to and fro, tracking who came in, who left, who lingered in the parking lot. It was tedious, but sometimes these details pay off. The footage showed Greg entering the hotel, same as always. Calm, alone, carrying snacks. It also showed a few of the electricians making multiple trips to and from their vehicles that night, but nothing looked suspicious enough to act on. Still, Brennan couldn't shake the feeling. Someone in that group knew something. So in late May, he flew back to Texas. Together with Apple, they began tracking down electricians who hadn't been interviewed the first time. It had been 7 months since Greg's death. A long time, yes, but long enough for someone to leak. Human nature, Brennan said. If someone knew what happened that night, even a little piece of it, someone else has heard the story by now. They weren't looking for a confession. They were looking for a crack, one offhand comment, one rumor passed around the worksite, one person too drunk at a bar who slipped up. Sometimes that's all it takes. And soon, that crack was coming. By now, Ken Brennan and Detective Scott Apple had spent months combing through leads, files, security footage, and suspect interviews, all leading nowhere. But if you've been in the field as long as Brennan, you know one thing. The answers are always there. You just have to look again. The strange rumor. While interviewing co-workers of the union electricians, Brennan and Apple met a foreman named Aaron Bork. Like most others, Bork had heard vague talk about a man dying in a hotel room. But nothing specific. Just whispers, confusion, muddled details. Then he added something strange. I think I heard something about a gun. Going off in a boarding house? Apple frowned. No, that's not the same case. This is about the guy who died in a fight at the Elegante Hotel. Bork hadn't heard anything about that. Most people would have let it slide, chalk it up to rumor. Confused stories tend to swirl when a mystery lingers for too long. But Brennan's instincts didn't allow him to brush it off. His gut tightened. A gun? In this case, everything in the official files had pointed to a blunt force trauma, not a gunshot. And yet, that nagging puzzle piece still didn't fit. Something was still missing. And suddenly, he knew exactly where to look. We need to go back to the hotel, Brennan said flatly as they got in the car. Apple raised an eyebrow. What are we going back for? We're going to look for a bullet. Room 348 had already been searched. Twice. But that didn't stop Brennan. They returned to the MCM Elegante and got access to Greg's old room. Then, side by side, the two men dropped to their knees and started crawling. They checked under furniture, ran their hands along the baseboards, tapped the wooden nightstand, and slowly moved around the perimeter. Every inch under flashlights. Nothing. Still, Brennan didn't give up. His mind was racing. If a bullet had killed Greg, where had it gone? Why didn't it leave a clear entry or exit wound? Why wasn't there any blood? And then he saw it. An indentation in the wall, beside the closed door that led to the adjoining room 349. It looked like the kind of dent you'd expect from a doorknob hitting the wall too many times, the kind of damage hotels patch and repaint routinely. But Brennan noticed something odd. When he opened the door and lined up the knob, it didn't match the mark. It was off. By a few inches. Let's take a look at the other side, Brennan said. With help from hotel security, Brennan and Apple entered room 349, the room where the union electricians had stayed. There, right on the wall, was a small round hole, crudely filled with what looked like pink toothpaste. The patch job was amateur, sloppy. But underneath that filler, the truth had been sitting, hidden in plain sight, for nearly a year. Brennan knelt beside the wall, measured the hole's height against his hip, then walked back to room 348 to measure the dent on the opposite side. They lined up perfectly. One hole in, one hole out. A bullet had passed through the wall between room 349 and room 348. The smoking gun. Crime scene investigators were called immediately. With delicate tools, they excavated the wall in both rooms. Once both holes were clear, they shined a laser from 349 through the entry point. The beam shot cleanly across the wall and landed directly on the bed where Greg had been sitting. Candy bar in one hand, cigarette in the other, watching Iron Man 2. The timing, the positioning, the height, it all fit. This motherfucker was shot, Brennan said. The mystery that had stumped Beaumont PD for 7 months had just been blown wide open. Greg Flanagan wasn't beaten to death. He didn't die of natural causes. He was accidentally shot through a hotel wall while minding his own business, watching a movie. Now the real question was, who pulled the trigger? And did they even know they killed someone? When it comes to solving a murder, you need the truth. But what happens when the man in charge of defining the truth refuses to believe it? That was the challenge now facing private investigator Ken Brennan and Detective Scott Apple. because the man who had first declared Greg Flanagan's death a homicide by beating was the same man now standing in the way of the investigation moving forward. His name was Dr. Tommy Brown, and in Jefferson County, Texas, what he wrote on a death certificate was law. It started in Dr. Brown's cluttered office. Stacks of paper, case files, and medical textbooks covered every surface, even the floor. Brennan and Apple cleared off 2 chairs and sat down, nervous but determined. They told Brown they were still working the Flanagan case. "Oh, did you catch the guy that beat him up?" Brown asked casually. "No," Brennan said slowly. "Not yet, but we think we know what really happened." Then Brennan laid it all out, gently. The bullet hole in room 349, the matching indentation in 348, the laser that traced a clean path straight to the bed where Greg had been sitting. Dr. Brown's face darkened. He knew what they were suggesting. "You're trying to tell me that this man was shot," he said. "I'm telling you he wasn't." The problem with the truth. Brown wasn't trying to be difficult. He had done the autopsy himself. He had opened the body, inspected every organ, documented the internal trauma. He had ruled out natural causes and had gone further, declaring it homicide by blunt force trauma. And now, they were telling him he missed a bullet? Impossible. He refused to change the report. Refused to order an exhumation. Not that it mattered.
I need a job with a steady paycheck.
I need a job that offers health care on day one for me and my kids.
I want a job where I can get certified in technical roles, like robotics or software engineering.
In communities across the country, hourly Amazon employees earn an average of over $23 an hour, with opportunities to grow their skills and their paycheck by enrolling in free skills training programs and apprenticeships. Learn more at aboutamazon.com.
Greg's body had already been cremated. The ovens had reached temperatures hot enough to vaporize metal. There would be no recovery of a bullet fragment. The only hope left was a second autopsy of sorts, one done using photos, looking for the impossible. "Listen, Doc," Brennan said, calm but firm. "Let's just take out the autopsy photos, go through them together, and see what we can find." Brown hesitated, then agreed. He pulled out the large, glossy forensic photos of Greg's insides. The table between them became a battlefield of images. Lungs, liver, stomach, intestines. All sliced open and preserved in 8x10 color. "What about this?" Brennan asked, pointing. "That's the liver," Brown replied. "And this, the intestines." Brennan kept going, methodically. He wasn't just looking, he was building a case. Because to him, every organ Greg lost that night was part of a trajectory, the path of a single bullet. Then Brennan focused on the entry wound. It had always seemed off. A small tear on the scrotum, barely half an inch wide. Brown had chalked it up to a kick or sharp object. But Brennan saw something different. He pointed again. "Doc, could a bullet have caused all this?" Brown paused. "Yes, it could," he admitted. "But that's not what happened here. This man was beaten." "Okay," Brennan said. "But Doc, could it have?" The room went quiet. Brennan picked up another photo. This one showed the lining of the intestines, a clean, sharp channel running through soft tissue. "That's a bullet track," Brennan whispered. Brown was shaking his head. "You could get the same kind of damage from being beaten." But Brennan didn't flinch. He flipped to the next image, the one showing Greg's heart. He turned it around, slid it across the desk, and tapped the photo with one finger. "Document." Brown squinted. "What?" Brennan leaned forward. "That's a bullet hole in the right atrium of his heart. The turning point." Dr. Brown didn't answer immediately. For the first time, he leaned back, silent. He stared at the image, not with arrogance, not with defiance, with realization. He hadn't missed everything, he had just interpreted it wrong. The entry wound, the trajectory, the internal trauma, the sharp, clean lacerations through multiple organs. The hole in the heart. A straight puncture, not a crushed tear. It was a wound made by something fast, hard, small, precise, a bullet. And just like that, everything changed. Greg Flanagan didn't die from blunt force trauma. He died from a single bullet fired accidentally through a motel wall by a man in the room next door. The question now was, which one of them pulled the trigger? And would they confess? Once they realized someone had died? When a killer signs a lie, that's when a real detective gets to work. 7 months had passed since Greg Flanagan was found dead in room 348. Now, in a small-town sheriff's department in Chippewa County, Wisconsin, 2 men had flown across the country for a conversation that was about to change everything. Private investigator Ken Brennan and Detective Scott Apple were calm, friendly, professional. Sitting across the table was a journeyman electrician named Tim Steinmetz, the man who had been staying right next door to Greg the night he died. The good cop routine. The room looked like something out of a courtroom drama. A single wooden table, cheap swivel chairs, notepads, manila folders. Steinmetz was nervous at first. Understandably. Getting a call from Texas detectives nearly a year after a strange death next door? That'll shake anyone. But the meeting had gone surprisingly well. They were polite. They thanked him for showing up. And as the conversation rolled forward, Tim got comfortable. He told them about the trip to Beaumont, the job, the hotel. He even mentioned the guy who had died next door. "Yeah, we heard someone died over there," he said casually. "But we didn't know what the hell happened. Didn't hear no noise. No commotion, nothing. That's why it's kinda weird." The detectives nodded, taking notes. Calm, patient, non-threatening. Eventually, Detective Apple slid over a statement. "Just read through it. Make any changes you need, then sign." Tim caught a small detail. Apple had listed him as an apprentice. "I'm a journeyman," Steinmetz corrected, scribbling his initials to fix it. A few other tweaks. A signature. A notary public was brought in to make it official. Tim stood up, feeling good. "That's it?" he asked. And then everything changed. Brennan didn't smile. He didn't move. He just said, "Hang on a second." His voice had changed. No longer warm. No longer friendly. Now it was low, sharp, dead serious. It was, "Until you signed that statement." Steinmetz froze. "Now you've got a problem." "Okay," Tim stammered, sitting back down. "Now tell us what really happened," Brennan said, eyes locked. "Because we know what happened. And now, you're going to jail with him." Silence. Then Brennan leaned forward. "You want to go to jail with Lance?" The first cracks. Steinmetz blinked. Everything he'd held together during that polite conversation crumbled. They knew. They knew about the bullet. They knew about the patched-up wall. They knew Greg had died in that room, next to him from a single gunshot. "Look," Steinmetz said slowly. "It was an accident. Lance, he was playing with the gun. He didn't know it was loaded. He aimed it at the wall and..." He snapped his fingers. Bam. Greg had been on the other side, watching a movie, smoking, eating candy, and now he was dead. The truth unfolds. The story was sickening in its stupidity. Lance Mueller, the man staying with Tim Steinmetz in room 349, had been showing off. They had been drinking, hanging out, bored, laughing. Then Mueller, like a damn idiot, pulled out a small-caliber pistol. "I wonder if it'll go through the wall," he'd said. He pointed the barrel at the adjoining wall and pulled the trigger. On the other side, Greg Flanagan sat watching a loud, CGI-heavy movie. He never saw it coming. The bullet punched through the wall, low and hot, and entered Greg's body through the scrotum. It tore up through his organs, slicing his intestines, liver, stomach, and heart. He was dead in seconds. And next door, they heard nothing. Maybe a thump. Maybe nothing at all. Just another muffled sound in a budget Texas motel. The cover-up. Steinmetz confessed it all. After the shot, they panicked. There was no scream, no knock at the door, no sound of an ambulance. So they assumed it was nothing. They patched up the hole in the wall with toothpaste. They packed their gear. They went back to work the next day. And they never spoke about it again. Not even when they found out someone in room 348 had died. "He didn't even know," Brennan would later say. He had no idea he had just killed a man. But now, he did. And the only thing left to do was go arrest the shooter. Why am I going to go to jail with Lance? That's what Tim Steinmetz asked, as the room suddenly turned cold and real. Until now, it had all been polite questions, smiles, notebooks, a smooth setup. But then he signed the lie, and Ken Brennan snapped the trap shut. You just made a false police report, Brennan told him. That's why. And that's when Tim cracked. The truth comes out. Detective Scott Apple leaned in, his tone softer. Tim, we know what happened. All of it. And I get it. You're trying to protect a friend. But you're about to drag your whole life down with him. It's not worth it. There was a long pause. And then Tim said 3 words every detective waits to hear. Okay, I'll talk. The whiskey, the gun, the bullet. It happened on June 1st, 2011, nearly 9 months after the shooting. What Tim said was quickly confirmed by Trent Paano, who had also been in room 349 that night. Here's what really happened. They were drinking beer, laughing, unwinding. Then Mueller asked Paano to run downstairs and grab a bottle of whiskey from his car. Oh, and to also grab his 9mm Ruger pistol. That was the first mistake. Paano returned. And within minutes, everything changed. Mueller pulled out the pistol, started waving it around, laughing, showing off. At one point, he even pointed it directly at Tim Steinmetz. He pointed it right at me, Tim said. I dropped to the floor, yelling at him. And then, Mueller turned toward Paano, aimed near the foot of the bed, and, boom, the gun went off. Everyone froze. The wall bleeds. Paano spun around. He thought he had been shot. But what he saw was worse. There was a hole in the wall. A perfect, violent hole, aimed straight at the headboard of room 348. Mueller panicked. He grabbed the gun, shoved it into his bag, and ran it back to the car. When he returned, Paano was gone, disgusted, shaken, done. Studio microphone, the coward's nightcap. Later that night, Steinmetz and Mueller went down to the bar, pretending nothing had happened. According to Steinmetz, they didn't even know for sure if anyone was staying next door, until, as he remembered, they maybe heard someone coughing. Brennan didn't buy that detail. If that's true, he said, then Greg Flanagan was alive, bleeding, choking, just feet away from you, and you did nothing. More likely, that cough had been from earlier, the night before, when Greg was very much alive. Either way, the silence that followed was damning. They never checked on him, never knocked, never called for help. Studio microphone, the moment of realization. Steinmetz was no longer trying to protect Mueller. Now he was protecting himself. I thought he had killed that guy, he said quietly. When we saw the gurney, I knew. And yet, they had stayed quiet, patched the bullet hole with toothpaste, and gone back to work the next day like it never happened. Studio microphone, the unfinished thought. Did anyone knock on his door? Brennan asked one last time. No, Steinmetz said. Then, almost ashamed, I always ask myself, if I was in a situation like this, what would I do? But he never finished the sentence, because the detectives had something else for him to do. Tell that same truth. Under oath. Hey Lance, what's up? That's how it began. Tim Steinmetz dialing Lance Mueller. A casual call on the surface. But this wasn't just two friends chatting. Behind Tim, in the shadows, were detectives Ken Brennan and Scott Apple. Their recorder was running. This was the moment of truth. Studio microphone, the lie starts to crack. Just sitting around, Mueller replied, relaxed, unaware. How did it go down there? Steinmetz didn't waste time. Well, I told them the story, the one we were sticking to, right? And then, they asked me to tell the truth. So I did. Silence. You could hear Mueller's mind spinning, realization crawling in slow motion. About the gun going off and all that? He asked. Yep, Steinmetz said. Denial kicks in. What did they say? Mueller asked again, more urgently. Not much, but I think they're coming for you, Lance. You should probably call Detective Apple. Try to get ahead of it. And then Mueller breaks. Are you shitting me, Tim? No, I'm not. Oh my God. Are you kidding me? Are you serious right now? Serious as a heart attack, Lance. The death that couldn't be real. Mueller could not believe it. He spun through every excuse, every loophole, clinging to the one thing that had kept him sane. The autopsy report said it wasn't a gunshot wound. He was desperate. If it was a firearm, they would have said something on the damn news. It doesn't make sense. But the truth was, it did make sense. To everyone but him. Studio microphone, the lie he lived in. Mueller had lied to himself for almost a year. Told himself the bullet had just gone into the wall. Told himself the man next door hadn't really died because of it. He even believed the autopsy proved it. But the truth had finally caught up to him, and it was coming with handcuffs. Studio microphone, you killed a man, Lance, Steinmetz said quietly. And now they know. It doesn't make sense. That's what Lance Mueller kept repeating, even as the walls around him were closing in. First, they said it was a heart attack. Then, blunt force trauma. Now, a bullet? He couldn't believe it. Studio microphone, denial, meet regret. How am I doing? Steinmetz had said when Mueller asked. Not good. I need to drink some more beers. Mueller apparently followed suit, because shortly after he called Detective Ken Brennan drunk. I want to make a statement, he slurred. Brennan didn't bite. You're drunk. Call your fucking attorney. Click. Studio microphone, October 29, 2012, sentencing day. Detective Brennan flew to Beaumont, Texas. The courtroom was packed. Susie Flanagan sat near.
To remind you that 60% of sales on Amazon come from independent sellers, here's John from Devil Dog Pet Company.
We run our family business from Sterling Heights, Michigan, but we can reach customers all over the country thanks to Amazon. Good boy.
Shop small business on Amazon.
The front, flanked by family and friends. Detective Apple sat beside her. The man they were all here for? Lance Mueller, the man who had pulled the trigger. Studio microphone, a judge's reckoning. As the judge began speaking, Brennan stiffened. This might be seen as a terrible accident. Oh fuck, Brennan thought. Here it goes. 1 year. Maybe probation. But the judge continued. And this time, the tone changed. He spoke of negligence. Recklessness. A man dead. A wife shattered. Community lied to. 10 years, the judge finally said. Half of what Texas law allowed for manslaughter, but still 10 full years. Too little, too late. Mueller apologized in court. Maybe he meant it, but the damage had already been done. He had played with a loaded gun while drunk. He had heard the shot, seen the hole, and patched it with toothpaste. He had hidden the weapon first in his car, then with a friend. He never checked on the man next door, never made a call. And once the coroner ruled blunt force trauma, Mueller accepted it, gratefully. If he had just told the truth in those first hours, if he had confessed before Brennan showed up, he might not have gone to prison at all. Instead, he gambled and lost. The final twist? Even after Mueller's confession, the district attorney's office nearly didn't file charges. They were worried the case was too unusual, too circumstantial. But Brennan and Apple, they had done the impossible. They proved how a man in a locked hotel room was killed without anyone touching him. The case nearly fizzled. You'd think the hard part was over. The shooter had confessed. The mystery of room 348 had been cracked wide open. But the district attorney's office? They weren't so sure. Accidental gun discharges in Texas aren't uncommon, investigator Paul Noyola explained. Juries usually get it. Deaths like this fall in a gray area. In short, they were leaning toward a plea deal. Studio microphone, enter Ken Brennan again. When Ken Brennan heard that, he flew to Beaumont, straight into a meeting with Apple and the DA's investigator. And when they told him Mueller's gun, the murder weapon, was still locked away in an attorney's safe, and the lawyer might fight handing it over, Brennan lost it. Fire. I suggest you go down there with a search warrant and a Fing blowtorch and go get the Fing weapon, Brennan said. Studio microphone, this is not a Fing accident asterisk. He wasn't done. With Susie Flanagan beside him, Brennan laid it all out. No sugarcoating, no legalese. This wasn't some clumsy oops in the living room kind of shooting. This was a drunk man, in a hotel, waving a gun around while others told him to stop. A bullet ripped through the wall, killed an innocent man. Then that man, Lance Mueller, walked away, straight to the hotel bar, got drunker, said nothing, and when the body was wheeled out the next morning, still said nothing. That's not an accident, Brennan thundered. That's F***ing murder. He knew he could have killed someone. Then when he did, he hid the gun, ran to his lawyer, and pretended like it never happened. You think we're going to forget this? That ain't F***ing happening. The stakes were higher than Texas law. Brennan wasn't just fighting for Greg Flanagan. He was fighting for the idea that truth still mattered, that a cover-up could be undone, that responsibility didn't just vanish in a hotel hallway. The stakes were higher than Texas law. Brennan wasn't just fighting for Greg Flanagan. He was fighting for the idea that truth still mattered, that a cover-up could be undone, that responsibility didn't just vanish in a hotel hallway. Justice served, but never enough. Lance Mueller had finally been sentenced. 10 years. Not for murder, not for cold-blooded violence, but for manslaughter, the legal echo of what had really happened. Ken Brennan sat across from Detective Scott Apple at a small restaurant in Beaumont that day. One man ordered a drink. The other was still on duty, but both were relieved. Justice, in some form, had come. Studio microphone, then came Susie Flanagan. In the courtroom, she stood up. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. But her words, they hit like a blade. You would never have come forward with the truth. You murdered him. No, you didn't mean to, but you did. With every lie, with every cover-up. Over and over again. She reminded Mueller of the truth he had buried. You saw his body taken out in a bag. You knew you killed him. He meant nothing to you. Studio microphone, but Greg meant everything to her. Mueller had looked shocked as the sentence was read. And Susie? She watched that expression with icy calm. He's shocked, she told the press later. But not as shocked as my husband was, because Greg Flanagan died in an instant, sitting in bed, watching Iron Man 2, eating candy, smoking, unaware, unarmed, unbothered, then gone. You have met your match. Susie ended with the words of a woman who refused to give up. You have met your match, she said, staring Mueller down. I would have spent the rest of my life tracking you down. And I found you, Greg's murderer. I brought you to justice. Studio microphone, the body in room 348, the end. This story had no chase, no screaming, no dramatic crime scene. It was silent, subtle, almost perfectly hidden. But it only took one bullet, one patched hole, and one relentless detective. And a widow who would never, ever let go. This was not just a tragedy. It was a lesson. That truth doesn't rot. It just waits to be found. If you felt something today, don't keep it to yourself. Follow the Black Hour. Rate it, and share it with just one person. Search the name, The Black Hour. I'll see you next weekend, with more stories they don't want told. And hey, if you've lived through something strange, something horrifying, send your story to the email in the description. theblackharpodcast01@gmail.com. Who knows? The next episode might be yours. We'll be back with a brand new case this Thursday. Stay tuned and keep it the Black Hour. Thanks for listening. Bye.
That 60% of sales on Amazon come from independent sellers, here's John from Devil Dog Pet Company.
We run our family business from Sterling Heights, Michigan, but we can reach customers all over the country thanks to Amazon. Good boy.
Shop small business on Amazon.